this. You know when they're at the Louvre and they like...
Yeah. No, you almost got it.
Really?
Yeah. That's it.
I have to fire off.
Perfect.
We're out here near some beautiful beach. Got some lovely pandanus around us. We're so excited to have you here today. If you're someone who's ever felt trapped being your own worst enemy, today I want to give you one thing to help you ensure that you don't become your own worst enemy. Welcome to Beyond at Home. We all have the potential to become our own worst enemy. And I think the thing about becoming our worst enemy is that so often we don't realize that we are. I think it's a lot easier to see how other people become their worst enemy. You probably know someone who's just ended up in a really bad habit that you know if they only stopped doing it, then they wouldn't be defeating themselves so much. It's easy to see what a worst enemy looks like within someone when we see it in someone else. And that's why over the next 3 episodes of here at Beyond at Home, we want to help you. We want to help you ensure that you don't become your worst enemy by giving you 3 habits, or more so 3 preemptive habits that will help you ensure that you don't become your worst enemy. So the challenge for us to think about today to ensure that we're not going to become our own worst enemy is to pay attention to the tension, to listen to our conscience, to listen to that thing in our head that's saying, hey, I don't think this is right. I don't think this is who that person is. I don't think this is who you are. That way we can ensure that we're actually creating a narrative for ourselves that isn't a false narrative. It's not a lie. It's a narrative that we want to tell in future years to come. So to talk more about narratives today, I want to talk you through a narrative that we actually hear about in the Old Testament, that first part of the Bible. And it's a narrative about a fella that I'm sure, even if you aren't a church person, you know a little something about. This is a narrative about a shepherd boy who became king. King David, the second king of Israel. And again, you don't need to be a Christian or a church person to maybe have heard of this story before of David and Goliath. See, David rose to real prominence within Israel. He became really well known and legendary after he slayed the giant Goliath. So much so that the king at the time, Saul, he started to freak out because he thought this was going to be the end of his dynasty. Long story short, Saul arranged to have David killed multiple times, and eventually he just went crazy and mad and tried to kill him himself. And when that happened, David fled. He ran away. During that time, David made a series of silly decisions. And again, we're only one single decision away from becoming our own worst enemy. David became an outlaw. Throughout that time, he kind of had a group of people that came to follow him because David he was known to be the next king of Israel. It was anointed upon him. Throughout that time, David has his group of merry men, right? But he's also being tracked by Saul. Saul has spies out looking for him. And when Saul realizes he has a chance to get to David, he heads out with 3,000 of his men, 3,000 soldiers to go out and have David killed, to kill David. During this time, David and his men, they're hiding. In fact, they're hiding in a cave. And this cave that they're hiding in is dark. Oh, and it's probably bigger than this, to be honest. They would have had a better hiding spot than this. But anyway, one day they're in their cave. And as they're at the back of this cave, they see a man coming in to actually go to the bathroom. And this guy is Saul. See, Saul has his 3,000 men outside of the cave waiting for him to go to the toilet, because when you're a king, I guess you can have 3,000 people waiting for you to go to the toilet. They see this silhouette of King Saul, and this is crazy because in this moment, David and his men are like, this is our chance. This is our chance to stop a civil war. There'll be a quick moment of bloodshed to stop so much bloodshed. It was so clear that somehow God had just delivered King Saul to David. So David in this moment just intensifies and the tension builds. Imagine being David trying to figure out, what decision do I make? In one quick move, he could have Saul killed without even knowing. So David makes a decision. He starts moving closer and closer to Saul with a knife in his hand. He comes closer and closer and closer. And again, you can think what's going through his head. This is the moment. This is the moment where finally I can put everything to rest and I can begin to take the next steps to be king. But then he has this moment where he realizes, like, hang on, wait. Like, God has appointed Saul as king. I'm not going to murder my king. And also, I don't want the story that I share with my grandchildren in years to come to be a story where I murdered a king whilst he was going to the toilet. It's not the story that David wanted to tell. He didn't want to let himself become his own worst enemy. And just like you and I, we don't want our regrets of the past the things that have already happened. We don't want our mistakes that we might make today or tomorrow to be the things that define the story and the narrative that we tell in the future. You see, in that moment, David got his knife and he did something absolutely crazy. He took just a snippet of Saul's cloak and he took it away. Saul finished his business and he went out to the cave. And you see, what was remarkable is that as Saul left the cave, David came out. David came out with just that little snip of Saul's cloak and showed it to his 3,000 soldiers who were all looking at him ready to pounce. But it was too late, because in that moment, it was so apparent to Saul and the rest of his men that David was the better man. See, David had a story to tell where he wasn't defined by being his own worst enemy. So, what can we learn from David's story? I think if anything, it's this. In the moments where we have that tension that we need to pay attention to, the thing that we can do, in fact, this is our 4 Monday, what you can take into the rest of your week, is that whenever you feel that tension, to ask yourself, am I ready to pinpoint the cause? Am I ready to pause in order to pinpoint the cause? Am I willing to not just ignore my conscience, but actually listen and spend the time listening? So at the end of the day, it's just like it was for David, and just like it can be for you and I. When we have the opportunity to pause and pay attention to the tension, we have an opportunity to learn more about ourselves, more about our own thoughts, our own feelings, and where it's coming from, why it's influencing your behavior. But in the process, I believe too, when we stop selling and we start listening, we also have an opportunity to hear more of God, more of what He wants for us, and more of the life and the story that He'd like for us to share with others. We're going to be talking about narratives a lot more in our next episode of Beyond at Home. But is there a tension that deserves your attention? Is there a tension where people have said to you, really, you're doing that again, you've slipped back into that habit, really, you're telling yourselves that again, it's not true? What does that tension look like? What does it look like to give attention to that tension? Because when we do, it'll lead to fewer regrets for us. It'll allow us to tell a better story tomorrow. And at the end of the day, giving attention to that tension could be the very thing that ensures that you don't become your worst enemy. Hey, if you had fun today out on the beach and hanging out with the coastal Banksias and the Pandanus, make sure you drop a comment in the comment section below or hit subscribe, share with your mates. We'd be so excited to catch you again next time round for How Not to Be Your Worst Enemy, episode 2, right here on Beyond at Home.